Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Don't Let Cultural Debt Drown Your Business. My name is Sarah Ryan, and I'm delighted to be the moderator for this webinar. Our presenter today is John Rouser. He is the IT manager here at TaskTop. Outside of work, he is an active member of his community, serving on the boards of the Project Management Institute Canadian West Coast chapter as VP of Operations, and the Vancouver Maker Foundation as the Director of Sponsorship. John has a passion for cultural and management issues in technology and loves to read about and discuss business management strategies. So if you want to continue any of the discussions that we start here today, you can find him on Twitter. You see his handle right there on your screen, or you can also find him on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he'd be happy to continue the discussion. So without further ado, let me hand things over to John.
Hey, Sarah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate being here today and having this opportunity to speak to everybody. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Vancouver, and it's a great day to be talking about cultural debt. In this webinar, we're going to explore the topic. We're going to talk about what it is, where it comes from, what it looks like, and what can we do to protect against it. We're going to try to make this a bit of an interactive webinar today. We're going to send out a couple polls halfway through and then near the end. I know this is a new topic for a lot of people, so I'd really like to hear your feedback as we go along. If something pops up in your mind, something really resonates with you, throw a question in the question box. You can, like Sarah said, you can also hit me up on Twitter. But like I said, this is a new topic. The goal is to get people thinking about this, how it affects their lives, how it affects their organizations. And it's something that we can work towards getting better at managing in the future. So like I said, here's the agenda in front of you, and so we'll get started talking about first technical debt. So technical debt, where does it come from? Why do we even deal with technical debt right now? Well, the term was coined back in the early 90s by Ward Cunningham, one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto. He had to justify to his boss some time that he needed to spend refactoring after a release. So his manager, not a technical guy, the way that he could understand it best was in financial terms. And so Ward came up with this concept, and he started plugging it, and he made it into something that is now just a practice. It's almost a sub-discipline of engineering management today. We all recognize that tech debt slows us down. Cunningham recognized that it's good to take on a little bit of the debt now and then, as long as you're taking it on with eyes wide open. But as it builds up, it compounds. The interest payments get bigger. If we're not paying it down, the consequences get worse over time. A little bit of technical debt that's kept around at the beginning of a project will be killing you when that project scales out. So it's something that we now have a lot of strategies and practices around. Some examples are using a tech debt backlog, including the cost for tech debt in estimation, scheduling buffer tasks to do refactoring, a cleanup phase and release planning, these kind of things. These are all strategies that all good engineering organizations are doing. But what we're seeing is that tech debt is really only the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. So now we need to start looking at the bigger picture, and DevOps and a lot of different movements in engineering right now are really calling attention to culture and how we can do a better job of managing it. Cultural debt is a decision that's going to borrow against the culture of your organization. These decisions can introduce divisions between teams, deteriorate communications, even weaken the effectiveness of leadership. And they need to be made regularly throughout the software development lifecycle and actually throughout the business lifecycle. So it's critical that we start identifying them, calling them out, and managing them accordingly. If the interest on these cultural debts goes unpaid, even if the principal on these cultural debts goes unpaid, we end up with a toxic environment that's difficult and onerous to manage. We risk actually a paradox where innovation is actually stifling progress. So, right now, I'd just like to call it that, in my opinion, all cultural debt is bad debt. There's not a good form, a good way to borrow against your culture. That's my opinion. I know I'd like to hear what you think. Is there a situation in which taking out cultural debt is good? Have you ever seen that? I personally, I have not, but I'd love to hear if something comes up for you while we're having this presentation here. Managing cultural debt. So when you give something a name, it becomes tangible. We're able to recognize it more easily. We're always managing culture. We're doing things like regular meeting cadences, face-to-face, communications plans and programs and things like this. This is just part of our job. But sometimes we have to make these decisions where we know it's going to impact our organization in certain ways. And this is where we can start using this concept to ensure that we're thinking about this stuff. We can either leave things to chance, and parts of our organization will be good and parts will be bad, or we can actively try to control how we're impacting our organization with these decisions. Debt makes an organization fragile, so that's why it's important to be thinking about this. So let's talk about the ingredients of culture. So these are the things that when you're taking on cultural debt, you're borrowing against. We're going to do a little poll at the end of this section. We're going through about 5 different ingredients here. I'd like you to think about sort of what impacts you, what's most important to you when you make these decisions. Are you thinking about this stuff? And if you are, which ones are really, are you actually considering when you make decisions in your business? So first of all, mission. Ensuring connection to the company. Ensuring that there's minimal variance in how mission is understood by different teams and departments. What we need to watch out for is making changes that are introducing divisions between teams so that people aren't all rowing in the same direction, so to speak. Different teams have different priorities, and maybe they even start competing against each other. We see this a lot. It's an anti-pattern, actually, with team compositions, where, and there's a lot of good research that shows that keeping teams aligned and making sure that they're on the same page is going to result in better quality products, better quality software being delivered. Values, effective and reliable transmission of company values and personal values. The ability to apply values consistently across the organization, ensure that they're clear and tangible. We need to be watching out for decisions where we're asking people to compromise on their values, putting their integrity at risk, maybe creating the perception among outsiders that could persist for a long time. Your classic tech debt example of a team being pushed to release features early rather than testing them thoroughly is actually asking people to compromise on their values. So not only are you taking on this tech debt, but there's this cultural debt too that we often just don't think about. Communication, the ability to talk openly, discuss with trust, challenge each other, provide channels for communication, and use those channels effectively. What we need to watch out for here is introducing breakages in communication that create knowledge gaps, cutting people off from information they need about decisions, about the product. For example, you could end up in a situation where different teams aren't talking to each other anymore because of a decision that cuts them off from each other. And we'll look at that a little bit more closely in a second. Finally, visibility, providing the ability for everybody to see not just inside their domain, but all across the organization, democratizing access to information, knowledge, and decisions. We really need to watch out for engaging in activities that are not visible to other people in the organization, doing things that cut people off from what they need to know. Somebody once said to me, don't be a mushroom. The mushrooms grow in the dark. So you don't want to be growing mushrooms in your organization, living in caves, keeping people in the dark. You want things out in the light where they can be seen and shared by all. And finally, attitude. So the happiness of employees, their effectiveness, their retention. We need to watch out for situations where we're putting people with a sense of no sense of control or ability to affect the outcome of their environment, cutting them off from a connection to the bigger picture. So why don't we send out that poll right now? We had 5 things that we just talked about quickly there: mission, values, communication, visibility, and attitude. Are these things that you consider in your in your decision-making process? And if so, which ones are most important to you? I'll give you just a quick minute to think about that and submit your answer.
Great. We're seeing a lot of responses come in. Looks like values and communication are pretty close tie for first place. Keep them coming. Couple more entries. And you can select all of them that you want to. Give it another minute or so. Last chance. Okay, here we go. I'm going to close the poll.
Okay, so the results on that values. So that really resonated with people when you're asking people to compromise on their values or setting up different value systems in an organization. If you have any examples of that resonate with you, throw them in the questions there. We can talk about them afterwards. So let's move on to this next section. We're going to talk about what I'm calling cultural debt catalysts. So these are situations that tend to create a lot of cultural debt. This is where cultural debt is going to crop up. These are sort of the danger zones, and I think we're going to go through 4 of them. I think in these examples you're going to get a good idea of I'm going to give you a couple ways that I've seen this happen. It's going to give you a better context for how this stuff happens. So we'll start with technology introduction. So on the slide here I've included a bunch of great technologies that I think we're all happy to be rid of, but in business we're presented with new technologies that promise to deliver these benefits all the time. They're making promises. So let's assume that they're making good on these promises. We're doing an analysis up front, and we're found that they're actually delivering. So language, new language like Kotlin comes along and says it's way better than Java. We can do things faster, quicker, easier. We do the analysis, we find out it's actually going to do that. It's going to increase velocity, it's going to simplify development, or maybe a new delivery tool comes along. It's going to indeed remove a key bottleneck. So we want to bring on these technologies. Invariably they carry a lot of cultural risk. People who are unfamiliar with the technologies, with the language, for example, are going to feel alienated. There's going to be new silos that build up immediately around the knowledge and expertise in that domain. There's going to be issues with knowledge integration and knowledge sharing. You're going to introduce divisions into the organization based on that line. Are you still developing in Java? Are you developing in Kotlin? So this happens to me when it happened to me recently when I needed to bring on a new tool. I was looking at monitoring systems and log collection systems. So there's actually a lot of stakeholders and users of these systems that I really actually don't need to talk to get my work done. I can actually just push these decisions through, research the technology, push the decision through, deploy it, and next thing you know, it's something we're using. It's not worth it. Doing the upfront work to get the buy-in, make my work visible, saves me from the cultural debt down the road. I know when other teams find out that I've got these new technologies deployed, I'm asking them to use them without even seeing if they like them, they're not going to be happy about it. So a couple techniques that we use are doing a technical analysis up front and doing a business analysis. So the purpose of the business analysis is to engage my stakeholders, ensure that my requirements are being met, and that everybody has buy-in. And I go through a process to do that. Similarly with technical analysis, a process through the selection phase, and then publishing these documents internally for historical context that people can refer back to them when they question the decision. And they will. They always question the decision. Teams change. People change. People are rotating in and out of the organization. Somebody new comes along. Why are we doing it this way? Well, I have a document that I can point to that shows how I evaluated, and it relieves that pressure that's going to build up, and invariably going to build up in these decisions. So, performing these kind of analyses and publishing the results ensures that I'm actually not going to be taking out future debt in my decision making. I don't just go ahead and implement the technology. I take the time to do these things. It pays off. So the second example I have here is domain-specific tooling. What is domain-specific tooling? It's specialized applications that we need in roles that are doing specialized things. For example, sales and Salesforce, IT and ServiceNow, your development teams and their APM, agile management tools. And, as our organizations and our roles and software development and IT evolve, become increasingly specialized, we take this best-of-breed approach, bring on these tools to perform complex tasks. Unfortunately, what happens is these tools create silos. And the more tools we bring on, the more fragmentation, the less visibility that we have and that we're giving people. Essentially, this means the business is going to need to devote cycles to meetings, emails, other noisy distractions, Slack channels, just to pay down the interest on the debt, just to get the visibility and the coordination that you lost when you brought on this specialized tooling. Provide that cross-functional effective leadership. Paying down the debt, you're going to need to integrate these tools. Without doing so, you're going to be in a situation where teams aren't able to communicate with each other. So I was in an organization where the product team, essentially the software delivery team had evolved to the point where the product team had this huge, massive, year-long roadmap, and they needed a new tool. They needed to get out of the agile planning tool and into something specialized for this long-range planning, company-wide backlog management. They brought in this tool, and the discontent started immediately when the engineers get cut off from the planning. They get cut off from the information, the bigger picture about what they're doing. They start feeling disenfranchised. A little bit of resentment is growing. What people are telling us what to do. We can't even see what we're working on. They start to feel like pawns in a game, somebody else's game. So it's the right decision to bring on this specialized tooling. The road mapping had become so complex, but when you're doing that, you're actually borrowing against culture. There's a lot more going on there beneath the surface that we have to start looking at. In this situation, it took up a ton of cycles to get everyone back aligned again. Many meetings, the CEOs involved, the leadership teams are all involved, getting people feeling like they have a stake in the game again, simply because we brought on a new tool that the team needed to do a better job in their team. So a very interesting situation with cultural debt accrued in compromising communication, visibility, and attitudes. Here's a good one. I love this example. Bi-Modal IT. So you heard about this from Gartner. They set up this idea a couple of years ago that you could have a two-speed IT organization. I don't think it was necessarily a new idea. Companies have been doing this for a long time, but the name or the giving it that label was new. So this two-speed IT organization, one that's moving on fast, innovative projects, and the other that's focused on stability and uptime for legacy systems. So it's a strategy that some companies used for enabling cutting-edge technologies, setting up these two IT organizations operating under different constraints. It's valuable for encouraging the adoption of these new technologies, experimentation, and so on, but it's also going to encourage confusion of responsibilities. It's going to encourage rivalries between teams. Now there's a legacy team and a fast-moving new team. There's a good team and there's a bad team. You get knowledge silos and double work because these teams stop attending each other's stand-ups. They don't know what each other are working on, and you get double work going on. The longer the structure remains, the deeper the cultural divide is going to be, and the more difficult the transformation is going to end up. The problem is, if we think about Bi-Modal IT as being this deliberate structure that we put into place, and a lot of times it's not. Organizations don't realize that they're getting into a bimodal situation, and so they don't plan for reintegration. They don't plan to pay back the cultural debt that they're taking out. You can think of the example of a greenfield mobile project. So we're starting a new app, we're releasing it into the App Store, we're working in Objective-C, we've got a different technology stack. We maybe even start bringing on some new tools, start using some SaaS tools like GitHub. So the problem here actually is the success. The Greenfield project is very successful. It's fast, it's easy, everything flows. But what you've actually done is created so much cultural and tool debt that you can't bring projects back into the organization. You can't connect them back to the real back-end systems of the organization. And you get this anti-pattern of silos developing and team compositions, team rivalries. So this is a great example of an organization taking out a debt and not realizing it. It's unmanaged debt, and it sits there, it festers, and it grows, and it's it becomes a real problem. So my last example here is everybody's favorite, the crowd favorite, DevOps. So DevOps is hugely influential. It's changing a lot of the ways that organizations are delivering software. But the dirty secret, I think, about DevOps is that it involves a lot of cultural debt. It's so much cultural debt, actually, that it can tear an organization apart if it's not managed closely. DevOps transformations are on the same caliber, on the same. They're similarly impactful to the lean transformations of the 70s, and just as in those transformations, it scares a lot of people. There's change, and there's not just a little bit of change, but there's change about everything: automation, infrastructure of code as code, CI/CD. There's things people just don't understand that they feel threatened by, and I think that this is why DevOps is primarily regarded as a cultural movement. Because it has to be a culture first thing. It has to be about the people, because the changes to the people are so pronounced that we need to be thinking about this first. I think about the example of continuous delivery in an organization I worked at, where the release engineering team was asked to do continuous delivery, get the technology in place so we can do continuous delivery. And so they started exploring options and trying to solve the technical challenges. And what they quickly discovered was that the engineering teams didn't even want continuous delivery. They didn't feel like it provided them any value. And they hit this wall. They found it very difficult to make any progress on their objectives. And the cultural inertia of the organization is actually getting in the way of being able to action on their work, on their decisions. So you can see that just going and trying to figure out the technical stuff, ignoring the cultural issues is not going to work. And it's not going to work in this situation or any other. It's going to result in a lot of resistance within the organization. So those are my 4 examples. I think we're going to do a quick poll here again. Cultural debt catalysts. Which of these, we went through 4. Which of these are you experiencing right now? Which of these are affecting your organization, if any? If none, then select none. If more than one, select. You can do a multi-option here. We'll give it a minute to get people's responses in. How are we doing there, Sarah?
Still getting some more coming in.
Okay.
We've, it's a little bit more of an even distribution this time, but definitely we have a front runner.
Okay.
But I'm not going to spoil it. I'll wait for everyone to get in their in their responses. Okay. Consider it your 5-second warning, and here we go. So let's share this.
Domain-specific tooling. Interesting. So that tool silo issue is coming up for people. It looks like it was only 1 or 2 people that answered that more than the rest, but it is interesting that domain-specific tooling is coming up. It's definitely something that we need to think about when we're bringing on these specialized tools. So let's talk the last 10 minutes here about managing your debt. Debt management involves, in my mind, it involves either building up enough capital so you don't have to take the debt in the first place. It involves paying back the initial as fast as possible so you don't let the interest accumulate. So I think those are 2 good strategies. And a couple bad ones are just paying the interest. So you're never actually paying back that principal, and you're probably building up principals in other places across the organization, maybe ones you don't even know about. And finally, ignoring it altogether, pretending it doesn't exist. So let's hope nobody's doing that after this presentation. Hopefully you're thinking about this stuff and thinking about a strategy for managing it. So I've come up with 4 different ways that I think we can action on this. Firstly, knowing your culture. So I got some bullet points up here of different cultural artifacts that are in your organization. Some of them you might not be aware of, but all of them are key. And if you're taking the time to think about them, you'll be able to assess your cultural impacts a little bit better. Some stuff that I'll point out a couple things like tribal structures. So your organization is obviously not just the org chart. It's not defined by the org chart. There's a lot of tribes, cross-functional relationships that exist in your organization. Knowing these, having some awareness around these is going to be really helpful for you to know what you're going to be impacting. Who are you going to be cutting off from what information? Who are you going to be affecting when you ask people to make sacrifices? Things like meeting cadences and composition. So who's attending what meetings? How often are those meetings happening? These are actually examples of rituals and ceremonies. If you're in the Agile world, you're familiar with Agile, you know about the concept of ceremonies, things like the stand-up, the retro. These are all key things that help people build culture, and changing them, breaking people apart from them, tearing people out of these rituals and ceremonies, it doesn't end well if we're not managing it, if we're not giving people the space that they need to sort of to use these effectively. So we want to be thinking about what are we touching, what of these things are we affecting when we make decisions. For me, this is the difference between being trapped by Conway's law and leveraging it. So these are all, at the end of the day, they're forms of communication, they're communication structures. Conway's law says that the systems we build are a factor of your communication structure. So knowing these things means you can actually leverage Conway's law. You can use these to your advantage. Somebody came to me the other day and was talking about a technical practice that they wanted to implement. They were having a real challenge yet pushing this forward. And he said to me, I feel like I've really hit the limit of my sphere of influence. There's just not much more I can do. I don't have buy-in from up top. I'm trying to do a grassroots, trying to push this technical practice out on a grassroots level, and it's just not working. I don't know what else to do. And I actually drew his attention to these cultural artifacts and asked him if he could leverage any of these to his advantage. And it turned out values. His team structures, the teams in his organization didn't have good charters and values. They weren't aligned around a common set of values. And so he felt that by getting people aligned with values that sort of emulated the practices that he wanted to implement, he would be able to push this technical practice forward with that. So he's embarked on this mission just to get some consensus around values and then leverage that to be able to push his technical practices through. I think that's a great example of leveraging Conway's law, using it to your advantage rather than being trapped inside it. And you're going to get trapped if you don't know the system, don't know what you're working with. Understanding your stakeholders. So I like this pretty graphic here, but I don't know if it does justice to what I mean by this. So I come from a business analysis and project management background where stakeholder analysis is sort of as a core competency and key practice in work management. So it's something that I do on a regular basis to understand the ramifications of my actions. It's not going to be possible to do a stakeholder analysis for every technical decision or every decision that you need to make, but an actively maintained stakeholder matrix is going to increase your mindfulness, and you can refer to it for a free sanity check whenever you're making a big decision. I think it's a good thing to do, some upfront work that builds up that capital so you don't have to to take on that debt later. Getting buy-in, so key. Giving people a stake in the game rather than imposing decisions on people. So I talked about this a little bit with the technology selection, giving people the opportunity to be a part of what you're working on, even if it's just in a small way. It's been proven in a lot of studies that even when there's negative consequences, if people have buy-in, it's a lot easier to pass decisions to get things going in your organization. And finally, we've got a couple minutes left here. Finally, is embracing the 3 ways. So I'm borrowing this idea from the DevOps movement, but all of these 3 ways are making an investment in your culture that you can hedge against later. So you're setting up your organization to not have to take any debt. So systems thinking is going to give you that ability to consider how decisions are going to impact everything, not just the local area. Feedback loops are going to give you continuous feedback and communication about the impacts of your decisions so you can adjust accordingly. And finally, investing in a culture of learning and experimentation ensures that the organization is going to be able to adapt and be resilient when changes happen. So those are my 3 actionable ways that we can hedge against cultural debt. I'll just give a final thought here. When we're making these decisions, these difficult choices in our organizations, it's important to keep people in perspective. That's why I like this slide. You got the tip of the iceberg here and some real perspective on what it actually looks like. So we want to understand our organizations as networks of people, and even when it's a very technical decision that we're making, we can think about a bigger cultural picture. If you think about your organization as a network of people, processes, and tools, and at the end of the day, then what we're trying to do is connect things in your network, bring people closer together, reduce those gaps, share knowledge, tear down silos, and so on. Our goal is to connect organizations as connected systems and allow people to work as effectively as possible. So keeping in mind cultural debt is going to allow us to do that. So finally, just a little plug here for our upcoming conference, TaskTop Connect. It's happening on October 4th. We've got a lot of amazing speakers, Gene Kim, Robin Neiman, Mark Ford, Carmen Diardo. These are all big names in the DevOps field, and they're going to be talking about their experiences at their companies and how TaskTop has actually helped them. So I think this is a great opportunity to learn more about TaskTop and learn more about these companies. If you register, if you want to register, you can go to connect.tasktop.com.
So I think that finishes up your presentation. Is that right, John? Are we ready for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to remind everyone that you can ask questions by entering them in the questions panel of the GoToWebinar control panel there. And we had a couple of them come in. So we had someone ask if you could give an example of a time when a decision was made that impacted the values, that kind of went against the values of a company.
Right, so this is your classical technical debt scenario where you're asking people to release faster, and in doing so they're compromising on their values. It's a very common scenario, and we don't think about that. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and what really resonated for him was that when the technical debt started accumulating and cropping up, and it started affecting people's sales cycles, it started affecting the pre-sales team's ability to demo the product even. He felt that that damage to the reputation of the team was not going to be easy to shake. It's going to live a lot longer than the technical debt, and that weighed really heavy for him. So that's the kind of thing that we want to be thinking about when we're asking people to do these things. It's more than just the fact that they're going to be doing rework later. It's actually the perception of the quality of their work, the perception of their team, and then how they're perceived by the rest of the organization.
Right. And I know that we talked a little bit earlier about how, teams that are doing this well are, they have higher employee engagement, they have, higher employee net promoter score, according to the 2016 State of DevOps report. So, all of these decisions that you make really impact your ability to retain these key employees.
That's right.
Yeah. So we have, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Let's hear the next one.
Yeah, we have kind of just a comment as well from one of our Agile coaches on the line, and he says that he also likes to include the organizational debt cycle by Michael Sahota, and when he's coaching, kind of drawing some parallels between this and that one. So if you haven't seen that, you might want to check it out. Everyone on the line.
Excellent. Yeah.
And I think I didn't see a single example of good cultural debt being suggested. So far your theory stands.
Okay.
But definitely continue to think about it. And if you have any other questions or suggestions, you have our contact information there. We will be sending out a link to this recording tomorrow, as well as the slides. And let's see, we had another person say that their organization is embarking on some of these new initiatives and they're starting to take on cultural debt, but because nobody's really heard of the term yet. So this is a great way to communicate it better to the leaders. So
yeah,
I think
that's the important thing coming out of today is that we have a name for this, and we can start thinking about it. We can start talking about it. People aren't afraid to talk about cultural debt, or technical debt. That's a normal thing now. We need to discuss it. We need to action on it. It's not we know we're making these shortcuts, these easier, faster ways, and we are being upfront about it. I think that makes a huge difference in the way that people feel about the work. So similarly with cultural debt, it's going to make a huge difference if we're able to talk about this stuff and give it a name and say, hey, you know what, that's cultural debt you're doing right now. We need to think about that. Is there another way we can do this? Is there a better way we can manage so that we don't have to deal with the consequences? And the consequences are huge. You end up with a really toxic environment where people don't want to work there, and it affects like you said, it affects your retention, it affects your NPS scores, it affects people's happiness, and so it's something we can start calling out now.
Right, exactly. So let's see. Obviously, TaskTop can help with some of this as well. So by connecting all the different tools in your lifecycle, you can eliminate some of that cultural debt. So we have a couple of other people making jokes about naming other issues in our life that we want to fix debt, like relationship debt in marriages and stuff like that. So maybe we have a whole new framework for thinking about all of our problems in life. So definitely lots to think about. But if you want to solve any of these problems within your organization, I don't think we can necessarily help your personal life, but you can definitely go to tasktop.com and learn more about how we can help, and reach out to us if you have any other questions. So if no one else has any questions, I don't see any new ones coming in. I think that's all we have for today. So thank you, John, and thank you everyone for attending.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. I really appreciate having this opportunity today.
Great. Everyone have a good day.